Hello, everybody. Welcome to the final panel for track 2. And what we are keen to do for you today is to give you a super high energy, snappy panel with some great conversation. And we also have the opportunity for you to ask some questions. We're going to try and carve out some time at the end for a few kind of key questions. We'd love to hear what you think. This panel is space sector economics and investment. But we can take that two ways, as one of our speakers has reminded us. One is the intrinsic value of the space sector itself and the economics and investment of that. And the other is, what is the impact of the space sector on the larger economy, on the larger GDP? And so that was an interesting spin. So we're going to have a crack at this. The way we're going to do it is we're going to have each of our panelists give a short presentation, and I'll introduce each panelist in turn, and then we'll sit down and have a panel discussion with some key questions for you. And then, as I said, at the end, we'll have a little bit of time for your questions. This will all be recorded on video, and so also you'll be able to review it and share it with friends later. My name is Tim Parsons, and my role currently is the entrepreneur in residence at the National Space Industry Hub at Cicada Innovations, where I've coached now up to about 14 space startup companies there, and I'm delighted to be involved in that. And I have a few other roles. But this is not about me. It's about our first panelist, who I'd like to introduce. Kate Ramsey is going to talk a little bit about the spatial area in her role as Deputy Chair of the Geospatial Council of Australia. Kate, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Well, good afternoon. I'm conscious that it is the last session of the day, and we are going to talk about some numbers, but hopefully we'll find the conversation engaging and we'll get into some chunky topics. So as Tim mentioned, my name is Kate Ramsey and I'm the Deputy Chair of the Geospatial Council of Australia. And we represent the interests of the organisations and individuals working in the geospatial domain, including surveying, geospatial sciences and location-based outcomes. Many of us interact with location-based technologies and services each and every day, and whilst not necessarily here in this audience, but more broadly, I am continuously surprised at how little people know about the sector or connect an outcome they've experienced to a geospatial or a space capability. From guiding tractors on farms to mapping the impact of insect plagues, nearly all sectors across the economy use geospatial or location-based capabilities in some way to drive these outcomes. And so when I was preparing my comments for today and kind of thinking about that notion of pervasiveness, it kind of kept bringing me back to this theme of interconnectedness. Now, I don't know whether it was the events of last week, and I don't know whether any of you experienced some of the impacts of CrowdStrike, but it is a timely reminder how interconnected our systems and capabilities truly are. We could spend hours on that part of the conversation, but there was also a presentation at Locate 24 by Dr. Martine Wolf about our PNT capabilities and how they impact things like banking and finance, supply chains and transportation. But I think it's a really interesting word to frame our conversation today, just how pervasive and interconnected these capabilities are. And then what does that mean in terms of economic impact if one part of the value chain is not realised? And in fact, in the World Economic Forum report released outlining the trajectory of the space economy, geospatial is characterised in the space value chain as reach applications. Applications such as search and rescue illustrate the importance of space-based systems with location-based analytics. Without satellite-derived positioning technology and global satellite communications, it would be impossible to coordinate rescue missions. climate forecasting and prediction, an essential community service that we know has significant economic impact, the Earth observation data that accounts for about 75% to the input of those weather prediction models, and closer to 90 to 95% in the Southern Hemisphere. The report maintains that by 2035, an economic impact of the space sector could be in the order of 1.8 trillion, with just under 50% represented by those REACH applications, or the geospatial location-based applications. But what are we seeing domestically? Well, globally, we know that the geospatial sector is growing at an average compounding rate of between 12 and 14%. However, the growth in the Australian geospatial sector has lagged at a compounding rate of between 9 to 10% year over year. So how do we start to realise those higher growth rates? What does that actually mean, and how do we achieve them? Well, for the geospatial sector in Australia, it looks like a $650 billion increase in total economic output over the next 10 years. It represents a $540 billion increase in Australia's real income over the 10-year period. And it represents the need for the creation of over 32,000 geospatial-related jobs. No mean feat given the current skills shortage and the transition of workforce development frameworks, points of access, and investment at large. At a sector level, the current impact of geospatial in 2024 represents $63 billion in government services, over $126 billion in mining, and $30+ billion to agriculture. And at a consumer level, it represents over $7.7 billion in consumer mapping. And this is simply an estimate of current day. But what does the impact look like with favourable conditions, and how do we realise these conditions? Under favourable conditions, there is considerable upside. An additional $40 billion inside of mining, $10 billion in construction, just over $10 billion in financial services and insurance, which should really be called out as an emerging sector in terms of deep use of available geospatial capabilities. And the upside in demand for geospatial capabilities and outcomes is simply the pull that is described in the space value chain through REACH applications. But how do we achieve favourable conditions? What are the key considerations? And I'm sure we'll spend a bit more time talking about this on the panel. From a GCA perspective, there are a number of key considerations, but primarily building workforce and capability, skills, something that's topical for everyone. Further developing and supporting a thriving and capable ecosystem to deliver technology and services, including supporting the development of the necessary frameworks to generate economic ecosystems around geospatial investment, and importantly, representing the voice of our community and membership as the industry transitions in alignment with technological advances, market demands, and regulatory environments. And in serving our community to address the above priorities, we must engage widely and deeply with our colleagues across the different parts of the space industry to build shared alignment on impact and outcomes, as this alignment serves us all well. But to that end, the question that I ask us all to consider today is, how do we collaborate better to tell the stories of the impact and the outcome of our shared value chain? We are part of an integrated value chain that has enormous impact on our communities, our environment, and our economy. And whilst I am biased, I am quietly confident in the fact that some of the biggest challenges of our time cannot be solved without a location-based approach. And you, our colleagues here in the space industry, are a key collaborator in helping us solve some of those challenges. So in summary, I'd like to close by saying that a significant proportion of value in our respective sectors is realised by creating and sharing downstream applications, telling the stories of impact and outcome. You are an important ally in realising the full economic impact of geospatial and vice versa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. And you can download a copy of that report from online. Is that correct? Fantastic. Terrific. Okay, cracking right along. Our next speaker is Dr. Vinod Kumar, who is Director of the Promotion Directorate of Indian government organisation called, and now I'm going to get this wrong, but In Space. In Space, terrific. Vinod, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Tim. And I see even it is almost last session, but good audience. We don't see generally. Very good afternoon to all, and welcome to this very interesting panel. See, when commercialization of space started, we call it the Space 4. You know what is Space 1, 2, 3? Space 1 was the one when astronomical observations were there. Must have seen that people were observing the space, what is happening there. And you read our book by Aryabhata, written in 500 AD. It's a very unique book which has a lot of discoveries without any instrument. That's the kind of computational power he has, and which in his honor we have really launched the first satellite of India, that is Aryabhata. So it was followed by Space 2, where there was a competition to land on the moon. And that's the kind of competition led to some discovery. Then Space 3 was there, wherein there was a kind of race where the cooperation came, and it led to the marvelous accomplishment of International Space Station. Then came the private actors' entry to the space to commercialize the space. This is very much necessary for sustainability of the space. We need to commercialize space and take its benefit to the mankind. So I have something what all we have been doing. So the very first thing comes, you have to define what is a space economy. When you are talking of space economy, what it constitutes. So there is a standard definition brought out by US BEA. I am not going word by word, you can read it, but basically it consists of all the launch activities, that is we call upstream, satellite making activity, downstream application, as my previous speaker has already told that it's a tremendous number. But what happened basically, I don't know whether one or two countries I see, I think US has started computing the impact of space economy on their national GDP. EU has worked out the framework. And we are also working with government, how we can take out. So definition wise, it's a very simple, in which way it helps, where space component is used. It can be R&D also, it can be the book also, patent, everything comes in that. So encompassing where space is used for the benefit of common man comes under this sector. So you see very interesting thing, Indian space sector reform were in 2020. And you see how Indian companies are going. Yesterday's number was 238. So you see how fast it has in 2012 one, and here somewhere we have reform. And you see 238 we have reached. This is the global trend in 2000, we are much faster than. Over 16 years, they could make 340, we are already here. So you see the kind of support government of India is giving is tremendous in all aspects. Be it the hand holding, be it the using of ISRO facilities, be it the expert advice, and many other entrepreneurship development programs. And we are there. Even our private companies, as I have been telling earlier, they can install their facility, launch facility or any facility in the government land. And it has been done for one of the private company who has launched his satellite launcher recently, unique launcher. So this is, you see with the company, what else is happening? We got exponential rise in the foreign direct investment. And I'm very pleased to tell you, this is before our foreign direct investment policy, which is, I have one slide. You see how the interest in economy is growing. That's very important factor. And you know, India is moving towards third largest economy. We are overtaking many things. And this is all because of the proactive government and the policies of the government. Government's aim is to enable the people. When you enable them with the technological support, expertise, even technology transfer of ISRO technology we are doing to the private sector. And after that, unique thing is they can develop them further, and that is theirs. Means we don't claim on patent and other things. So whoever grows his files. So one of the main aim of the government remains to lay a roadmap for the country. So for that, first time we carried out decadal vision and strategy for Indian space sector, and it is only for commercial. If you go for strategic, it will be double of that, even more than double. So you see here, we want from 2% to 8% humble target is there, and it has been there that the component what will be export is around $11 billion and 33 is the in-house. So there's a lot of things in this. The road, not only this, we have identified the strategic goals, strategic capabilities, enabling, and the need is to develop the space culture in the country. So if you see this, when everything is put in place, the vision is placed to the people of India, and it is received well. These are the numbers. They are the estimated numbers by the some computation and all. It can be very high, higher than this, but generally whatever our studies are there, India has proven in 99, McKinsey has done for IT sector. What we did 10 times more than that. So we hope that space sector will continue, and each sector, each 8 area segments are there where we have a target. In each sector we have set the target for the country, and we will measure it through our Ministry of Statistical and Program Implementation. We will discuss it later, maybe, probably. So our target during Amrit Call, we call is the 2047. We have to take it to sub 675 because world economy is expected to be 1.5 trillion. Some of the people are saying by 2040 also it can go. So these are all estimated numbers. So I will come upon here where I was telling that foreign direct investment, as you see, the cap is 100%. So we are looking for global collaboration. Investment in space sector, you see here, automatic route 74%. Mean you invest, start working. So here in subsystem, you can go up to 100% automatic. And in launch vehicle, being a strategy, the 49% automatic. Beyond that, it's a government route. So these are my opening remark in this. Thank you very much, Tim. Looking forward.
Thank you very much, Vinod. I love the ambition, and we need a lot more of that here. Great stuff. So our next speaker, Junku, who's investment manager at Main Sequence, who are a very ambitious organization, I know. Over to you, Jun.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to speak with you all today, and I'm going to do my best to keep to my 6 minutes. But my name's Jun Q. I'm one of the investment managers with Main Sequence, and what I want to do today really is to, first of all, give a quick summary of who we are and what it is that we do, but also share some of the observations and learnings that we've had being investors in the space sector for a little bit of time now. So first thing is, who are we at Main Sequence? We are an early stage deep tech venture capital firm based here in Australia, and we're actually probably the largest deep tech investor in this part of the world. So we've got just over $1 billion under management with about 65 companies in the portfolio since we got started in 2017. Now, what makes us a little bit different from other VC firms you may come across is, first of all, that we only do deep tech. And what do we mean by that? We only invest in companies that are developing novel technologies with innovative science and engineering at its very core. And actually what our origin story actually comes from the sad fact that some of you may know that Australia is absolutely world leading when it comes to our R&D output. I think we heard that in some of the previous panels today. But we're actually bottom decile in the OECD when it comes to whatever it is we actually commercialize. So we were very much created to be, hopefully, the venture vehicle to help address that gap. Many of you may also know that we were co-founded by the CSIRO, but we actually work with every university and research institution here in Australia. And so we invest anywhere from pre-seed onwards to really help catalyse the growth of some of the most ambitious companies in the country. Now, the last but probably most important thing to highlight here is that we also have the largest space portfolio in Australia. While we invest in a really broad range of deep tech areas, like Tim mentioned, anywhere from healthcare, food and ag, AI, climate technology, robotics, and quantum as well, space technology is a big area of focus for us. And we've backed companies all through the value chain. So companies such as Alula, for example, who's building an EO data marketplace and some of the data infrastructure for management of that. Advanced Navigation, who's developing inertial navigation systems for spacecraft. You've got Gilmore, who's obviously enabling sovereign launch capability from Australia. Myriota, who spoke earlier today. And these folks are providing direct-to-satellite IoT connectivity from anywhere around the world. You've got Quasar, who's building a scalable phased array ground station system for SATCOM and SDA use cases. And finally, one of our recent investments was into Skycraft, who's providing a LEO constellation to give the full suite of air traffic management tools all from the space. Right? So while it's a pretty sizable portfolio, there's still plenty of additional opportunity that we're really excited about in the sector. And in the next couple of slides, I'll kind of showcase what some of these areas might be. If we take a pulse check on the overall space ecosystem as a venture investor, there's really two big things I want to highlight from this page here. And the first is that, and you've heard this many times over the past 2 days, is that globally the space sector has only continued to grow and is growing very, very rapidly. Like in 2023, this is the data that we're seeing here on this page. There was about $6.6 billion US invested into about 300 space companies all around the world, okay? And we're already on track to fast exceed that in 2024. But I think the sobering part of this that I haven't put on the slide is that of this 6.6 billion, only 150 million of that was into Australian space companies, which is about 2%. So although that funding here in Australia has actually 10x'd in the past 5 years, so the 150 million is a great achievement, it's still a tiny sliver of that global capital that's going into companies. And so it's just a bit of a reminder of the job we still have to do as we talk about building up our space ecosystem in Australia. Another piece of that is building up the investment ecosystem at the same time. The second takeaway here is, maybe I should have led with it because it's the majority of the slide, is where in the value chain, in the space value chain, that we're seeing the most investment and interest. And you can see that it's really a small handful of subsegments that have attracted the majority of investment over time. This is all capital that's been raised to date, and you can see the vast majority of that funding has gone into things like launch, but then also Earth observation, communications, and satellite manufacturing as well. And there's a good reason for that, and because if you think about where some of the biggest bottlenecks and challenges are in space and on Earth today, those are pretty much the main ones, right? I think it's also a really good reflection of our investment thesis that I'll talk about later, of space companies needing to solve really, really big problems that are imminent and immediate right now. So over time, our hope is that some of these other categories, like tourism, habitation, etc., and also space debris, that things like this are going to pick up over time as the market grows and there is more and more demand for those capabilities. So in my final slide here, what I wanted to do was share a bit of a short summary of some of the learnings that we've had investing in the sector. And I'll canter through these quickly because I know I'm coming to time. But the first one here is that space companies really need to think global from day one. We saw in the previous slide that the vast majority of investment today is still coming from overseas investors. And that means that if you're positioning as a space company, you need to have global traction and global proof points to really attract that investment from all over the world. And unfortunately, that still is going to be the case in the near future. The next 2 points here are actually very interrelated. And it's all about the kinds of opportunities that are venture opportunities if you're a space company. And really what I'm iterating on here is you've got to be addressing these really, really large problems. And later on the panel, we'll talk a bit more about what makes for a good venture investment. But you've really got to have, the potential to be $1 billion company and also be able to generate that return within a 10-year time frame, right? And so to be able to get to that point really, really fast, you've got to be solving big problems that are huge and in demand to be resolved today. The fourth point here is building on that a little bit on the commercial side, and it's really all around value capture. Unfortunately, a lot of the time we meet companies that are building a really, really sophisticated component to solve a point solution in a very narrow part of the stack. But the question we always ask is, well, how are you going to capture value longer term and be a viable business? And this is where we think about, okay, is there a way that you can become more of an end-to-end provider to capture more of that upside as part of what you're providing? And the last 3 points here that I'll finish with are really all one of the same. It's really to help companies think about what are other ways that you can stay viable and get funding and continue to operate. And these three are first of all, Are there any terrestrial opportunities? A good example is a lot of the robotics companies we speak to who are trying to do space robotics. Is there an opportunity for you to do something here on Earth in the short term while you're continuing your technology development? The second part is defense and being dual use as a way to attract some early development revenue and contracts. Now, admittedly, getting full-blown defense contract is a very difficult and challenging thing, but we've seen previously from things like DIH that there is defense funding for early technology development that can really help to bridge that early valley of death. And then the final piece here is more generally around grants and also non-dilutive funding. I know one of my colleagues, Eva, is going to talk a bit more about dilutive funding and the importance of that going forward, but as deep tech investors, and especially when you're investing in things that are very capital intensive, any sorts of non-dilutive funding and grants that are not equity and things like that are really, really critical to enable you to grow your business effectively. So with that, that's really just a quick summary of some of the learnings and observations and things like that from our side at Main Sequence, and looking forward to taking questions on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I found that quite surprising, the amount that's gone into launch globally. Thank you so much. Such a useful slide. Okay, next up we have Imelda Alexopoulos, or Alexopoulos, as I'd like to say, if it was true Greek, who has the coolest job title, Director of Exploration Strategy. Very jealous. I love that one. At Fleet Space Technologies. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thanks everyone, it's fantastic to be here, and I just loved that last slide of yours, Jun, because I feel like Fleet, and I'll be telling a bit of a story about that now, is a fantastic example of all of those things on your last slide. So I do have the coolest job as the Director of Exploration Strategy at Fleet Space Technologies. And yeah, I've only been there for almost a year now, but I had the privilege of working with Fleet in my previous role for about 3 years. Now, clicker, how do I do that? This one? Yeah. Perfect, all right. So since the founding of Fleet, the team has been laser focused on building technologies that expand the frontier of exploration in space while helping to solve really hard problems on Earth. And our perspective is that the ceiling of our potential to become a spacefaring civilization is largely defined by the challenges here on Earth. So this led us to focusing on connectivity and building Australia's first LEO satellite constellation to help make industrial IoT more efficient. But on our journey, we learned about the severe shortage in critical minerals needed to achieve net zero, and we discovered a way to help exploration companies find the minerals needed for the energy transition and to do so faster and more sustainably with space technology. So this has become our mineral exploration solution. It's an end-to-end solution called Exosphere, and it's powered by space and AI, and it has really propelled our growth over the last 18 months or so, and it's helped us to double our valuation to 350 million and also close our Series C funding round of $50 million last year. But what has made our approach so effective is the flywheel we've built. And that's where the innovation of what we're doing in the terrestrial exploration space drives our innovation in off-world exploration. So using space tech combined with 3D multi-physics and AI, we are providing new insight into the Earth's subsurface. And this is from the hundreds of surveys that we've undertaken with leading exploration companies globally. But what's really special is we are also testing our technologies at space analogues or lunar Martian simulated environments. So for example, and this is a picture of our geode, our terrestrial device at the Canary Islands, because we recently collaborated with MIT's Space Exploration Initiative to develop 3D maps of some of the world's largest lava tubes in the Canary Islands. And these are similar to the lava tubes that you would find on the moon. But from this technology that we've developed on Earth, we're now developing SPIDER, and that's the seismic payload for interplanetary discovery, exploration and research, because we love our acronyms and it needed to be very Australian. And it's part of the $4 million grant from the Australian Space Agency as part of the Moon to Mars demonstrator program. And SPIDER will be deployed upon Firefly's Blue Ghost Lander 2, and it will go to the dark side of the moon, and it's going to be in early 2026, and it will search for water ice. And SPIDER furthers our mission to deploy cutting-edge exploration technology on the moon and to find accessible and abundant water by 2030. And we call this mission the Seven Sisters mission. So SPIDER's deployment on the moon is a massive milestone for Fleet, but it's also going to be a massive milestone for the Australian Space Agency. It's going to be a massive milestone for Australia, as it'll be the first seismic technology to be deployed on the moon, the first Australian seismic technology to be deployed on the moon. But it's also a testament to what can be accomplished when you combine your roadmap for space with unlocking innovation that is needed on Earth. So one of the main learnings on our journey, which I also believe to be key to our success when navigating the investment landscape, is the importance of building technologies to meet the specific needs and capability gaps of our customers. And for us, this has been across multiple sectors. So in the exploration sector, Fleet has, we will be leaving a lasting positive impact. So we're having an impact now, but that will go well into the future. And we're helping to build more resilient global supply chains for critical minerals, and ultimately we're reducing the environmental impact of exploration. In the defence sector, Fleet's constellation of microsatellites has demonstrated powerful new SATCOM capabilities. And with a $6.4 million contract with Australia's Defence Space Command, our Centauri 4 satellite is the smallest voice-enabled satellite in the world. And then in the space sector, as I mentioned, SPIDER is really the perfect opportunity to further develop and adapt the technology we have developed for use on Earth, for use in space, and to advance the exploration of the Moon and Mars. So to close, I wanted to emphasise that the focus on the customer problem or need, no matter what the industry, really has been key for Fleet. It has helped us to not only gain investment, but also to maximise our return on investment. And we've aligned with our target customers, helping to focus our roadmap on finding innovative solutions that will serve long-term needs across a very complex and dynamic stakeholder environment. So this approach has absolutely helped us on our journey to the moon, and it will hopefully help us to get even further. And I really believe the Australian space sector can unlock even more successes, delivering the best of Australian ingenuity to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Imelda. That's terrific. Fantastic to also see Australian space and mining companies coming together within Fleet. And you didn't mention that last year Fleet was the AFR's 2023 fastest growing company of any company in any industry in Australia. It was very exciting. Now, I'm hoping our panellists have got some microphones. They're coming up here. We are going to start with some questions, and we have about half an hour to the end of our formal session. We're going to see how snappy we can be, and then we'd like to try to make sure we leave a little bit of time for one or two questions from the audience. So, Kate, I'm going to start with you. Kate, the World Economic Forum McKinsey report you mentioned, alongside the 2030 report, talks about an exciting picture of downstream growth. You and I had a quick aside. Earth observation feels like a sector that should be worth 10 times more, even 100 times more than it is today. Where is the Google, where is the Canva in this space? What demand signals are you seeing? What opportunities are you seeing to if we're going to hit that 1.8 trillion number that the World Economic Forum is suggesting. Where is that growth going to come from, do you think?
Thanks, Tim. That's a good question, and I think there's a lot to unpack from what we've heard today. It's a really interesting question, and I think part of it is actually about how do we tell the story. To Eva's point, I don't think we tell the right stories to the community to understand what capabilities are available. I look at something like financial services, for example, and I talk about that in the geospatial landscape as almost an emerging capability, because I know from an insurance perspective, for example, we're really starting to see geospatial or location-based capabilities embedded in those products, but it's taken us a while to get there. When I think about Earth observation driving parametric insurance products, but to Eva's point, how do we do that so that we're creating financial products that are more accessible, more sustainable as a result of having better data inputs and building better products? So we're seeing signals come out of newer spaces like that. I mean, ag, they're starting to do a lot more. You know, they've been in the game for a little while, but we're, you know, geofencing cows and things like that. You know, telling that simple story to someone who's running a farm is something that seems right out there when we talk about it and characterise it as space and spatial and other things, but can actually have significant impact on that yield per either animal or acre of land. So I think there's opportunity all over the place, but we've just got to start to tell our story a little more simply.
Yes, I was going to dig into, you know, Imelda, you talked a little bit about your exploration story, but also there's an Earth observation story at the heart of what Fleet is doing, correct? With, you know, the mineral exploration value you've been able to capture in the way that Karen's just described.
I think it's interesting because a lot of people assume that it's Earth observation because we've got satellites and then we've got our exosphere, but it's actually geophysics.
Yes.
So it's passive seismic, you know, acoustic noise, and we're able to do that very, very quickly in near real time, very low cost, and we need those satellites to, you know, crunch the data, transmit the data, but ultimately it's not necessarily Earth observation. So, you know, but many people think that, right? Because they just assume because of what we're doing and we're mapping, but we're actually mapping the subsurface. So we're doing 3D velocity models. And so, you know, we've hired geologists, geoscientists, geophysicists. So, you know, we really, like I've emphasised, and I can't emphasise it enough, really understanding the customer problem. And so we're making sure that we have the experts in-house that can do that, and we spend a lot of time with our customers. So, you know, we're working with the geologists at exploration companies, for example, but we're not necessarily Earth observation. So.
Sure, but I mean, you did pick customers who have a lot of money. So that's also something that I'll call out as a space economy and investment panel. For Australia, Kate, you know, where do you think we have strengths that we can leverage perhaps for unequal advantage in this sector, geospatial and measurement, and generally measuring the Earth and using it, turning it into economic value?
Sorry, the question in there is?
Australia, like what's our advantage? What might be the role that we can play that might be different to help drive that growth of the sector?
Yeah, I think as you know, everybody alluded to, we've got a really strong knowledge base in Australia. We do develop early stage IP well. I think where we've got to look at is then how do we better commercialise that, to John's point. But I think there's a piece in there where we then support emerging economies in sharing some of that IP, but understanding what is it that we're sharing versus what is it we're going to then commercialise and sell through. But, you know, we have a lot of capability that gets developed in our universities, to Eva's point, and then how do we really bring that to the fore in it from a commercial point of view?
I really like that. I'd like to pass the next question on to Vinod because there's a nice segue here. You know, you and I talked a little bit about how we have to almost take the space out of space, or rather look at the impact of space on the broader GNP. That's sort of the topic in a way, right? How do we make these space services drive actual GDP numbers, was your point. So I love the statistics you gave. What are you seeing the opportunities to collaborate with Australia? What are you seeing are the opportunities for Australia to be part of driving some of those numbers for India?
Yeah, so it's very great question. And see, when we talk of space economy, see, generally downstream people, as Madam has said, they will show very high number. People see, wow, is that this? Well, actually, what is happening presently, when you estimate, any country estimate the GDP or GNP of the country, it is mixed with other economies. Like satellite, they will give in aerospace. They will, agriculture sector, if it is that their contribution will go to agriculture sector. In fact, there is no definite way that countries are measuring it as a separate in their statistical numbers. So what we did in this direction, first we have defined what is called the space economy. Then we will identify those particular verticals, and international standards for industrial classification is there for each of space activity. I should appreciate the work by US BEA, that they have done very nice book classifying each item, providing ISIC. That's the old 2008 number. Then that number has to be mapped to the national industrial classification, where each nation will map and they make supply and use table. So when it happens, it doesn't disturb the existing framework, and it will give you the real number without impacting the other sectors. So no, as Madam was telling, we do only space part and geospatial is there. So there is a way out where we can estimate, and so that people have the trust on that. So coming back to your question regarding collaboration and this thing, when these numbers come out, now we have done some survey. By $44 billion, $11 billion is our export target. $33 billion is roughly 75% from internal resources. Now, if you see, it requires an investment of around $22 billion. So roughly 50%. So as somebody was telling, the ROE, investor will look as from the perspective of ROE. So considering that, yes, it's very much required. The investor should also get money. Now what happens when you see the India-Australia collaboration, there is a tremendous application in the agriculture sector you take that can benefit. Marine sector, another sector where you can use and collaborate in this sector as well. And not only this, the crop insurance is the another thing, vehicular movement. So even building information model, you can use the space technology to design your buildings, to monitor the progress of that. Forget about the traffic management. But yes, it is very much essential to estimate so that investor friends are happy with the outcome of this. Now, if you give any number, it's just either they are giving input-based method, how much investment is there. So generally in the process, gross value added, we need to calculate it, and certainly it will take some time. I think US is starting now. We are also working on this. So certainly these numbers will come out, and when technology helps the common man, that is the where money and sustainability of any sector lies. So we are looking forward with Australia, and see that I see a lot of MOUs are happening in various sectors. So certainly it will come up. And day is not far.
It does feel like it's an infrastructure story where India is thinking of resetting the platform of space and making it more accessible and more interoperable. Would you agree? That's sort of the vision that we seem to be hearing. And then by that way, you will impact on the common person and their.
Exactly. See, when you see in agriculture sector, we see the studies. I'm conducting one proof of concept where 30 to 40% saving happens. Farmers doesn't know which fertilizer they have to use. Without testing, if we go for our blood report, so we should know which parameter is disturbed. So like soil has 14 parameters. And then they will predict that this is the fertilizer you need to put. They will take some go-to market, ask someone, okay, they'll put urea, phosphate. This will continue. This spoils the fields. Whereas when he gives the optimum use of the fertilizer, he saves on that. Water stress is another parameter. From the space, you can find how much water you need to give. Rather than wasting the water, simply he will give and next day rain will come. So we have to integrate the space technology with weather forecasting systems. And I am a son of a farmer. We know that today you go and irrigate your field, tomorrow rain is there. Oh, we lost so much money. So it happens. It's the practical. We have seen and felt how they feel. And if such huge space technology, you can predict for 1 week at least, and you can further emphasize the models. I'll tell you that 2013, before that, when I used to go in my village, people used to laugh that what is this space technology? 9 o'clock we get the news, it never matches. After 2013, so predictive, we said 9:30 rain will come, it will not be 9:35. Then they were complimenting. So that is the thing wherein you integrate the space technology for the benefit of the common man. That where value lies. And that is the emphasis of our government and our Honorable Prime Minister. Take it to the common man. He doesn't know that he is using space technology. That is the real fact. He will be using mobile, he will be using, but he doesn't know from where he is coming. He knows that it is some antenna on the roof and it is this thing. So yes, there is a great opportunity and there is a great value that will touch the common man life.
Thank you, Vinod. So Kate and Vinod, you're very sort of macro picture here, which is fantastic. So this is hopefully now something, Jun, that I can get you to respond to a little bit with this question, because I'm feeling like the space startup companies we're talking about, we want them to be somehow addressing these macro trends, somehow delivering what you described before was that end-to-end value. So my question is, what you've given us some criteria there that you, as Main Sequence, look for. What are the kinds of, are those common across lots of different venture investors, or have you found that they're unique to you at Main Sequence?
Yeah, so I'd say that there's a lot of really good overlap there in alignment, first of all. But if I take a real big step back, what are venture investors trying to do? Fundamentally, our job when we raise a fund is to actually triple that money to generate a 3x return over about a 10-year period. That's kind of, and the vast majority of venture firms will have that as their kind of internal goal. And that has kind of two big implications. The first is, well, you've only got 10 years to generate that return, right? And so when you're thinking about developing markets and ecosystems that are building very much like the space ecosystem, there is a limit to, well, what's likely to happen, right? And so when we hear about 1.8 trillion, those are really, really promising signs, but there are going to be challenges along the way. So part of our job is to try to underwrite the risks of what's the likelihood that we're going to get there, and that we'll grow the company, it'll succeed commercially, and we'll actually be able to get an exit outcome to actually generate that funding. And then the other part is that you've got the time frame limitation of the 10 years, but you've also got the fact that we have limited shots on goal. As venture investors, when you raise a fund, you can only write a certain number of checks. And so when we say we're trying to 3x that money, remember that startups are probably the riskiest place to put your money, and the vast majority of these will unfortunately fail. That's the nature of very risky investments like that. And so if that's true, then that means that the ones that do make it need to generate way more than a 3x, right, to make up for the ones that don't work along the way. And so coming back to your original point about solving big problems in the world, and I think I touched on that a little bit in terms of our investment thesis, if the company doesn't have large enough aspirations to solve these billion-dollar problems all around the world, there's no chance that they're going to generate the return, supposing that they work out at the end of the day. So I think there is good alignment when you think of the space sector and you think of the big challenges and the huge impact that a lot of these companies can have. But that's the way that we think about it through a venture lens of what needs to be true to be a viable venture investment. And maybe the last thing I'd add is, I'm talking about this purely through the lens of what makes a good venture investment. It is not at all what makes a good or a bad company. And I think that's one of the things we really try to clarify. We meet plenty of really, really good companies generating steady cash flow, profitable, their customers love them, but they don't have that aspiration to grow to $1 billion company, and that's totally fine. It just means that it's not a fit for venture, but there may be a fit for other sources of capital.
And the kind of people you're meeting, like, are there folks who might be in the audience who are specifically got strong technical strengths, for example? Would your advice for them to be, okay, great, you've got this technical strengths, but go after a real problem, like do what Imelda suggested, which is try to find a real problem that might have scale value, take a pause, and then see if you can pivot or really understand how that technology that you've developed might impact on that. That is very easy thing to say, but is that the advice you tend to give?
Yeah, often at the very early stages, that's the big challenge that we find, especially when you think about deep tech. There is a bit of a cliche that you have a lot of solutions searching for a problem. There's often really, really interesting technology, and the question is, well, what can we do with it? And part of what we try to do in the ecosystem, as well as being investors, is to help guide some of these often very technical founders who have really interesting pieces of technology and help them try to find, okay, where in the space ecosystem or other terrestrial use cases, where can that have the greatest impact? And we try to help them think through that commercial pathway. But sometimes the answer isn't as clear, but that's often a lot of what we're aspiring to find.
Imelda, last question for you, and then I'm really keen for the audience to come up with a couple of zingers for us. We were speaking before, and you were sort of saying how at Fleet you actually had this discipline around diving into a specific vertical where you thought there might be an opportunity for IoT and your technology stack, and then being quite ruthless about, if you didn't find traction, moving on to the next one as a real kind of systematic search for product market fit, which must have been pretty scary journey, but I'd love your thoughts on that.
Mine. Is that way? Sorry. Yeah, look, that's why I have the coolest job. Not just the coolest title, but the coolest job. Because there's a lot of crazy ideas that come up at Fleet, but it is all about ruthless execution. So, anyone can have a good idea, but being able to successfully execute is another thing. And so it really is about, identifying that very, very quickly, working through it, working out if it's actually got legs, and then if it doesn't, move on. I think the other thing is like having the right team as well to be able to do the execution. So, we've grown really quickly, fastest growing company in Australia, but we've got 140 people now, and it's a very diverse workforce. We would have started with, a lot of satellite engineers, but like I said before, we've now got geologists, geoscientists, and we've got a large corporate workforce as well. Being really aligned in terms of our vision and what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we want to achieve, that all comes back to that ruthless execution piece as well.
And ruthless execution means, if the money is not there, if you haven't discovered a big pot of pain and suffering that you can take away that could pay for all of that, then that it doesn't have legs, right? That's really
that's right. But, it's not easy, right? So you've also got to be willing to take risks and be willing to go down the rabbit hole sometimes. But as soon as you understand like that's not going to make a difference, or we're not going to be able to execute on that, we move on.
Thank you. Okay, so audience who might have a question, and we may have to run a microphone over to you for the recording. Anyone have a question they'd like to ask? We've got one over here at the far right of the stage. If you could just say hi and where you're from and your question, if you don't mind.
G'day, Chris from the Institute for Space at ANU. My question is about deep tech generally versus other startup ventures, and I've heard the stat that it's the space side or deep tech side is a bit more favourable than your average startup in terms of investment. So I wanted to know if that was what you've seen in your practice and your experiences.
June, would you like to have a go?
Yeah, you have. You start. I can talk later.
Yeah, we can but add to that. Actually, sorry, I missed the last part of the question. If you could just restate that one.
Yeah, so I suppose it's the idea that deep tech performs slightly better than most startups in general when you're looking at it as a whole, and whether that translates in what you've been seeing.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to answer that. I would say I fully agree with that, and I guess it depends how you define the word better. And I think the way that I see it is that deep tech is certainly better in the way that it has potential for much, much greater impact. And if you just draw a comparison, with medical technologies or quantum or space technology with just traditional software, usually there's a much greater potential for impact, especially because the TAM, as Eva was talking about, for deep tech often is much, much larger. You're not selling a specific product to one specific market that's enterprise or B2B or something. When you're talking about, let's say, climate tech, it's the entire planet, right? And so even though, some of the common challenges we think about in deep tech are things like capital intensity, maybe it takes longer time to get to first revenues, but when you've got this aperture for much larger impact, in that way, it comes across as much better in a lot of different ways. And certainly there's the financial outcome that's possible as well. And I think we're seeing that a lot of venture investors are now delving more into deep tech and climate tech and space technology. And then further up the chain, if you think about the people who are funding venture funds, like the LPs, they're certainly starting to really favor that impact element as well. So.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are nearly out of time. I've got one more question that I wanted to ask the audience, so you, which I'd like you to answer in the sort of classic way by raising your hand. I'd like to ask in the audience, how many of you would describe yourself as from the business side, non-technical side in today's panel? Would you mind putting your hands up? So I'm going to do a quick review. I would say a little over half. Very interesting. And how many of you would say that you are a technical or a technology-focused person generally, like a CTO or someone working in research? Many of you there? So interesting. So we got more like 25%. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Well, look, we've had a terrific panel. I hope it's been useful for you. We've tried to run to time, and I hope you've had a fantastic Space Summit, Space Forum here in Adelaide. And thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you.